Imagine, a podcast series by Imagine Theatre.
Hello again, I'm Martin Ballard and this is episode 65 of the Just Imagine podcast, and the latest in our occasional series looking at popular pantomime titles, this time Peter Pan.
For more information, go to their website at www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.
In the last episode, we discussed some of pantomime's traditional and new routines, set pieces and timeless elements, from Slosh and the Ghost Gag to song sheets and front cloth favourites. Don't forget, if you missed that or any of the other previous episodes, you can still listen to them, and there are many more to come from one of the UK's biggest producers of pantomime and children's theatre. And don't forget, if you have any questions about Imagine Theatre or pantomime in general, send them in using the Get in Touch section of the website at imaginetheatre.co.uk, and we'll answer them on future episodes. So this time, I've been joined by Imagine's joint CEO and Managing Director, Steve Boden.
Hi, Martin.
And the Scottish TV, film and theatre actor and director, Steven Wren.
Hello, episode 65, you say. Is that a reflection on what you think my age is?
We haven't got to that number yet, Stephen. Thank you anyway. This is the next in our occasional series looking at the most popular pantomime titles. And this time, as I said, we're turning our attention to Peter Pan. And Stephen, we have to start with you because, of course, the origins of Peter Pan come from Scotland and J M Barrie.
Absolutely. How lovely. Yes. He was from a tiny place called Kirriemuir, which is kind of just north of Dundee. And in 2000, they wanted a kind of millennium celebration production of Peter Pan, and I happened to be in it. It was Theatre Babel that did it. So we set up in the park in Kirriemuir. The set was the roof of the Darling's house, and we did it at that lovely period of dusk. So as people were watching it, the lights became more and more important. And by the end of the show, it was kind of fully lit. It was a lovely, lovely production.
It's a fabulous story, and that's why it's been turned into plays, musicals, notably the Stiles and Drew musical, movies and so on, and tells an amazing story about a free-spirited and mischievous young boy who can fly and never, ever grows up. The origins date back to the beginning of the 20th century, 1902, and from there, the character, the book, the story has never looked back, Steve. It's just an incredible story, isn't it? And works in every medium.
It does. It's a story that doesn't necessarily immediately say pantomime to you. Of course, we deliver it as a pantomime title, but it's got so much more to it. It's there's a huge amount going on in the book, and Barrie wrote it as a play to start with. So he clearly saw this as a way of telling a story about this child who never grows up, and his siblings, or Wendy and Michael and John, who he in effect treats as his siblings, although he is he's a wistful character that takes us on these magical journeys. I think it's a really interesting subject. It took us 15 years to decide that we were going to tackle it as a panto. And I think that's because I'd always worried that it doesn't require panto elements to be a damn good story. And do panto elements actually impede the telling of that story?
Absolutely right. I mean, it was 1902 when Peter Pan first appeared, but it took until 1911 to become a novel. And we'll talk about J M Barrie, the copyright in Great Ormond Street a little bit later on as well. But as it developed, because of its popularity, do you think that's, Steve, one of the reasons why it automatically lent itself for panto?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, any title that children and families relate to and feel an affiliation to makes a great pantomime subject. But I think what it does incredibly well is give you a real mix of fairy tale with the fairy of Tink, adventure, which is the journey from London to Neverland, and spectacle. It has some great locations. You've got decks of galleons, you've got wooded areas, you've got by the shoreline, you've got interiors, a home underground. So yeah, the settings that it provides really chime with what we do in pantomime.
Now, before we talk about the unique elements in Peter Pan that you may not find in other pantomimes, Stephen, what about those elements that aren't there to start with, that you automatically will find, hopefully, in a pantomime? There isn't, in the original story, of course, any sort of role for a dame, is there?
There is when I do it. But I think that's one of the things that panto does successfully with a story, because it blends the two things. The thing that I love about Peter Pan as well is that you've got Captain Hook, who's the evil character, and he gets his comeuppance with the crocodile, so bad things happen to bad people, and that happens in pantos too. it's proved quite easy to find the dame character. So it's almost a version of Sarah the Cook, but at sea. So she's in there, she's on the ship, and she's just a reluctant pirate. And because she's a reluctant pirate, that also gives you some plotting elements of seeing what they're doing and kind of making judgments on that. It forms a nice blend, I think. The last time we did it last year in Inverness. That's the second time I've done it. And it kind of goes along quite nicely. So you've got plot, nonsense, plot, nonsense, plot, nonsense. But the nonsense has also got something to do with the story in terms of where it well, it depends on how you do it. The Minnehaha type character onto the little island and leave her there to drown and all that sort of stuff. So the dame gets involved in those sorts of things, which then allows that scene to become ridiculous as well as threatening. And it's that happy combination, I think, makes it exciting.
And also, Stephen, how did you work a slosh scene into it?
Oh, last year we had a brilliant one. It's the best piece of set I think I've ever done a slosh scene on. It was a rocking galleon. So it was like the kitchen on the ship, but the whole thing was built on a semicircular base. And so it rocked from side to side. And it was like Scream If You Want to Go Faster. We made that thing almost come off its tracks. It was hilarious.
I think I've used that one as well, Steve. I think you'll have memories of that. We used that at Loughborough, I think, a few years ago, didn't we?
We did, and this was a more internal variation of that. But I think what Stephen has said is absolutely right. Some pantomimes, you find yourself stopping the narrative to incorporate a set piece or a routine, whereas Peter Pan allows all of these set pieces that we do in panto, behind you routines, slosh routines, to actually fit in with the narrative. And that galleon scene was a classic because we're on board a ship. The dame's character is constructed as on the crew of Captain Hook and a sidekick Smee. So you have that double act, Mrs. Smee and Smee, and it just perfectly lends itself to that anarchy. And I think it's only been in recent years, perhaps the last 15, 20 years, when panto really has picked up the title that people have really successfully weaved pantomime into the story.
There are lots of elements that not necessarily unique, but in Peter Pan, you won't find them necessarily in other pantos. And the ship is one of them, although, of course, there can be very often is a ship in Dick Whittington. But Stephen, flying is possibly the most unique element about Peter Pan because the audience expect it, don't they?
They do. And, well, they better get it or otherwise. Although I would have to, it wasn't exactly a pantomime, but we did it as a Christmas show as well. When we did it in Kerrymuir, we used puppets for the flying. So Peter Pan and Wendy and John and Michael had puppets of themselves on sticks and they flew with that. But you can't beat that moment where Michael and John go, Christmas, and they take off. And everybody just goes, oh, because they expect Peter Pan to fly, but they're maybe not expecting everybody else to fly as well, the rest of the Darling family. So you've got this lovely sequence where they fly and they do that stuff. But then towards the end, when there's the battle on the ship, and we think that Captain Hook thinks that Peter Pan's been, that he's got rid of him because he's poisoned him. And he flies onto the midst of the battle and lands on a barrel and suddenly takes over. And it's that lovely element of surprise that people aren't expecting. The flying, it's so good.
And Steve, the other thing that we get skin characters in all sorts of pantos, but I don't think there's a crocodile in any other one, is there?
No, crocodile is pretty unique, and I have to say so is Nana the dog. Both animals appear in Peter Pan and both are really important, and I think it's like the giant in Jack and the Beanstalk as far as the crocodile is concerned. You tease the audience with its impending arrival, but you never quite see it until the very end. And then there's a number of ways you can play it. You can either go full scare and give a really freaky, scary crocodile reveal, or as we tend to do, it's actually a very child-friendly crocodile, and therefore everybody's left wondering why Captain Hook was so terrified of this thing, because actually it doesn't have the menace that you perhaps think, although it's clearly swallowed a clock and it ticks. But yeah, that's one of the kind of traditional parts of panto where you still get animal representation on stage.
The thing I like about the crocodile is it's after the baddie. So the kids can relate to it and go, so the crocodile's on their side because it's trying to get the baddie too. Whereas it's not like other skin characters, like the giant is out to get the heroine. Yes. And do nasty things to everybody. So I think that's where the crocodile, again, is another difference. What would seem like a scary skin character is actually on the right side of the story.
And something that is definitely unique about this one, Steve, is as a producer, you'll know all about this, is that link to Great Ormond Street Hospital, which is unique. No other panto story has that, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I think that's one of the great things, because not only are you providing audiences with a great story at Christmas, but they are in turn supporting a cause that J M Barrie was very, very keen to ensure got continual support from his work. So Great Ormond Street Hospital receives a royalty from all performances of Peter Pan in this country, and that's a percentage of the box office, and it makes up a huge amount of the charity's financial acquisition each year. And I think it's an important part to recognize that a story about children performed for families and children can support an institution like Great Ormond Street Hospital so successfully and see the benefits of it. And Great Ormond Street isn't just a London-based hospital, which I know some people think. It does work across the whole of the United Kingdom, up in Scotland, across in Wales, and across England and Ireland as well. And the work that they're doing is groundbreaking, and therefore being able to kind of help support a charity through royalties is a great thing to do. And as producers, you just accept, as you do with all cost elements on any production, that that's a cost that you will incur when you produce Peter Pan.
And finally, the other thing, which is not unique but slightly different with Peter Pan, Stephen, is the size of the cast, because you've got to have the Lost Boys, you've got to have traditionally, or historically at least, the Native Americans and so on. So it's a large cast, this one, isn't it?
It is. We're lucky in Inverness. We have an adult ensemble of 6. So they were pirates, but they were also, I mean, you mentioned Native Americans there. I don't know, there's a sensitivity about those things now, and rightly so. So we modified that to be Rainbow Warriors. So they were eco-warriors, and they were led by this character called Rainbow. So the ensemble become rainbows and pirates. So, and all the quick change and stuff that they do. But you've got the added thing of all the kids as well. So you've got, normally we would have teams of 8 kids in playing the junior ensemble. But with this one, we had 10, because you've got John and Michael's as well. The thing that makes it different from a director's point of view is that it's as if you're doing youth theatre as well, because the junior ensemble are the Lost Boys, and they will have lines as well as action and all that sort of stuff. So it's a slightly different directing job in that you've got to take that on board as well, which eats up time in the rehearsal room. But, it gives them something fun to do. So from their point of view, it's just like, yes, we're not just coming on and doing a wee step ball change at the back somewhere. Not that the juniors in my shows do that, but it just gives the kids something to bite onto. And then that, again, as a family show, that then gets a nice reward in what people say about it. Oh, the Lost Boys were just wonderful. How did you get them to do all that? Because we just get them to do lots of stuff. So that's a major change in terms of casting between other shows and this.
And Steve, in terms of production demands, we talk on all of these podcasts about the script, the music, the casting, and so on. I mean, the first consideration is the amount of time you need to set aside in rehearsal for the flying, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It does take a lot of time, and we work with some great flying companies. The leader in its field is Flying by Foy, who has been doing Peter Pan productions for many a year. It's the staple of what they do at Christmas. And it does take time to get those moments correct. You have to invest time in the rehearsal process, and you have to cast actors who are prepared to go with it. So part of our audition process for both the children and for the adults, because as Stephen rightly said, flying the children is an important part of it, and people don't expect to see the children fly, but John and Michael certainly do fly, along with Wendy and Peter. And therefore you have to schedule rehearsals in where they can build up their confidence with the flying rig, flying trainers who can teach them some of the tricks of the trade to make their journey and to make their portrayal of the characters flying as realistic as possible. And that does take time. And it also takes quite a big infrastructure within theatres. Some of the theatres that we perform in are fairly small in terms of their stage housing and their stage space. And therefore, as a flying solution, you have to think of different ways of achieving the same effect. But certainly up at Eden Court in Inverness, we are blessed with a very large stage space and plenty of space in the grid to enable us to have a very comprehensive flying rig installed for Peter Pan, and to allow them to do the various tricks and tumbles and rolls throughout the performance that Stephen as director would like them to do.
And Stephen, there's a very sort of small window of opportunity to do that in terms of the flying in rehearsal, because you can't really do it until the get-in has happened. So it needs to sort of happen in or around the tech period, doesn't it?
It adds a day and a half to the tech. And I mean, we know how tight panto schedules are, but it's worth it. It's what you have to do, and it all has to be done safely. And as Steve alluded to, the performers have got to be confident when they get up there, because it's one thing in the rehearsal or in the audition space. Yeah, I'll be fine with flying. It's another thing when you're 25 feet above the pros, going, oh, I need to be, what's going on here? And then you get lifted up and down, and particularly we had I don't know what you call it, but I can have a double attachment harness this year, which meant that, or last time we did it last year, which meant that Peter Pan could do all the spinning and tumbling and all that sort of stuff. And luckily for us, the guy playing it, Rhys, and his cover were both just fit, agile young men who were delighted to play and just added and added and added to what was possible, making it more magical. It was lovely.
The demands of a large cast are there as well, because not only do you have to have all the main characters, plus the skin characters you've mentioned, the Lost Boys, the Native Americans or similar, and the pirates, but some of those, if they're young performers, will have cover groups as well.
In most of our pantomimes, use 2 or 3 teams of children. And therefore, in productions that we do of Peter Pan, which tend to be in our larger venues, we're often rehearsing multiple casts of young performers. And that, that also takes time. It does add a good amount of time, certainly in tech, when you have to make sure that every team is safely tracked through their respective scenes. And I think Peter Pan is one of those productions where you just have to accept from the outset and in your scheduling that you will require more time than a traditional panto. The great thing about Peter Pan is that it does allow young people huge opportunities to be a real central part of the journey. And when we audition for our young companies for the pantomime, we spend particular time recruiting boys for the roles of John and Michael and to take part in the roles of Lost Boys, not just boys, but people who identify as boys as well. So often we find in auditions that we don't get a huge male representation in our companies. Peter Pan often bucks the trend, and we do see an influx of males and male identifying young folk to play those roles. And often you then find that they'll come back for the next few years to be in the company of pantomime. So it's a great recruitment opportunity.
Stephen, when you've done this, and you said you've done it a couple of times as well, historically, pantos will always have a choreographer, but I wonder whether you've used a fight director for the scenes, because historically there's always been a fight scene. You mentioned it on the ship where Peter takes on Captain Hook. Is that a fight director's role there?
It is. I love a big whole cast battle at the end, and I split the juniors off with the ensemble and say, you're in little groups of 2 or 3, you've got 15 minutes to come up with 20 seconds or 30 seconds of a fight. And they can do that, and they're playing and they're rolling over each other and running in and out and causing chaos. But Captain Hook and Peter Pan have to do an actual sword fight. So that's one where we absolutely need a fight director, and names always escape me, even of people who I know quite well. I'm a certain age, so that's what happens. So I can't remember who our fight director was last year, but he did a super job. And the thing that was lovely about the fight that he did between Captain Hook and Peter Pan is that he added character to them as well, in a way that I wasn't expecting. So Peter Pan was slightly, arrogant, if you like, going, yeah, I can do this with one hand tied behind my back kind of thing. This is easy. And the building up of the frustration in Captain Hook just added to the drama at that part of the story. It was a super thing to have. And I don't have that, as you say, in other pantomimes. We would just do a kind of battle scene of some kind that doesn't involve a fight director specifically.
Steve, in terms of the script and the music and so on, I don't think there's anything that is any different to any other panto, unless perhaps you want to use some specific music. And we talked about the Styles and Dream musical, for instance. You can lift character songs out of that if you want to, but generally speaking, the script and the music will have the story at its core, but obviously it will be in a panto vein like any other show.
I think the music scape for, as I call it, for panto, particularly Peter Pan, is very stylized. There's a lot of swashbuckling adventure. There's a lot of hero work going on between some of the front characters. There's less romance in Peter Pan than many of the other stories that we tell. There's not a clear romance thread, certainly not between Wendy and Peter. And therefore, where you get the ballads or the love moments, they don't really occur in this show. There's a lot more up-tempo, high-energy action, and that gets supported through the music. And yes, there are musicals that you can lift songs from, but I also think that, as Panto does, it reinvents itself musically every year with the latest chart hits or musical theatre covers. And I think what we're very good at is finding a real mix of songs that everybody feels a connection with, no matter what their age. Trying to find music that 3-year-olds and 103-year-olds will all relate to, I think, as long as it supports the action, is part of what we do for Panto.
Yeah, about the music thing, it's both a kind of pleasure and a curse that Styles and Drew's show is so good, because the songs are so appropriate for Peter Pan, and you think, oh, I really want to use another one, but you really got to restrict yourself. I've used When I Kill Peter Pan for Hook to do the poisoning, and I've used Good Old Captain Hook as well, because it's a great introduction to him as well. But there are other story songs in that show which I've gone, no, can't use them. We'll have to go to pop songs for that sort of thing. So it's a brilliant source for specific songs for Peter Pan.
Yeah, I'm told you even listen to it in the car, Stephen.
I surely do. So I shouldn't speak to you before we do these podcasts, because you just bring it up, and now I have to tell the story. The drive from Edinburgh to Inverness, halfway up, just about the Falls of Brewer, the radio signal drops because you're in the depths of the Highlands. And so I reach over to my glove compartment and I put on Styles and Drew, Peter Pan. That's my driving to Panto soundtrack, and it always gets me in the mood.
Yeah, so if anybody who's in the area sees a man driving north in Scotland with the soundtrack of Styles and Drew's Peter Pan, really loud, then they know who it is now. In terms of the popular, it is.
Oh, it's me.
Oh, see what you did there. Okay, Steve, in terms of the popularity, we've mentioned this many times before, but it doesn't do any harm that it's been Disneyfied, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I think what's interesting is Disney themselves are questioning their animated version, which is, the one that many of us remember seeing as children, and the various iterations and modern day takes on it that they have recreated. I think with all stories, what's brilliant is the way that it evolves as time goes by and people revisit these stories. They evolve, they move forward. Pieces of story that feel particularly sensitive or not necessarily relevant are taken out, and new bits of the story are explored and explained. And I think that's great. All pantomimes, move forward in their lifespan, and we change the way we tackle them as a producer and as an audience, is the way we interact with them. And I think, yes, the Disney factor is really, really interesting. I don't think there's any other story that we do in our Panto catalogues that have been worked on in film so many times as Peter Pan has. Various versions have been done. Peter Pan, Wendy, Hook, Peter Pan itself as animated and live action. Many producers, not just Disney, have also tackled it. And I think that's the same in the live sphere. There are many musicals, we've touched on various musicals that have been done on it. Various of our producing houses across the UK have tackled it frequently with their own in-house versions of it. It's just one of those stories that I think a lot of people have a lot of fondness for, and a lot of dramaturgs are very keen to do their own treatment of it.
Oh, and why not, Stephen? Because it's obviously popular as well, because it has all the stock characters that you know and love, and at the heart of it is an adventure.
Precisely. It's got all the things that you would want in a pantomime. So it is quite an easy fit, I think. The twice that I've done it, I haven't felt that the panto elements have got in the way of the story. I think they've enhanced it and just made it into that style. I mean, you could do it as an opera, you could do it as a serious drama. It's such a strong story. It stands up to adaptation really well, I think.
And Steve, in terms of the production side of it, bearing in mind that some of the elements we talked about, the large cast, the flying, for instance, and the fact that some of the box office goes in royalties to Great Ormond Street Hospital, it's a good job it is popular, because it's probably expensive to stage as well.
It really is. It's one of the most expensive pantomimes to produce, for all the reasons that we've spoken about. But what is really interesting is when you reflect back and you do your analysis of box office take and number of patrons who come to support productions of Peter Pan, they are significantly higher. And I think that is because of the endearing and enduring popularity of the title. People, I think, remember seeing Peter Pan for the first time. They remember potentially seeing it at a theatre, either as a pantomime or as a play or drama. And therefore people feel confident that they know what they're going to get, which is, I think why it is so popular, because the minute you say Peter Pan, you know what the story arc is, you know the journey that those characters are going to go on. And panto audiences like familiarity. They like to feel safe when they put their hands into their pocket and spend their hard-earned cash. They like to know that the show they're going to see is going to be one that they've enjoyed in the past and that they know their family and friends will also enjoy. But yes, it is a very popular and very expensive show to put on.
I was just thinking while Steve was speaking there about, knowing the story and what to expect. So say you pick a title like, I know I've done a Robinson Crusoe in my time. And what's the story there? Man on a desert island meets fellow, gets rescued. There's not much of a story, or Sinbad or such. Whereas a story like Peter Pan in itself is such a good story that it then lends itself to that kind of treatment.
What do you like about it in particular in comparison to other pantos?
I don't know. It's there are things to like about every style of show or every title that you do, and I think the thing that with Peter Pan is the size of it. That the kids are much more involved. The adventure takes place in several interesting and fun locations. You've got the magic of the flying. You've still got the good versus bad stuff going on. So the morality element, which I love in a pantomime, is in there too. And as Steve said earlier, the only thing that's missing is a romance in there somewhere. But other than that, Peter Pan's got everything you would want from a panto.
Yeah, and let's face it, Steve, as far as kids are concerned, they don't really want romance anyway, do they? It only makes them go, bleh.
Yeah, they reach for more sweets, or they decide it's time for a toilet break. And none of that happens much in Peter Pan. It just bowls along at a great speed. As we've said, you don't need to embellish it. The story is strong, there's a lot of adventure, and the whole thing goes from A to B in a heartbeat. And I think that's part of its appeal as a panto title. We always play our pantos with speed and pace, and a great adventure story absolutely allows you to hang that on it well.
Steve, what about the future of this? Is it going to last for a very, very long time? And obviously it will continue to evolve.
I think so. I think Peter Pan is in our DNA as a title for Christmas shows as much as it is for a play at any other time of the year. It's a great story, and I think with all great stories, their longevity is because of that reason.
And we've talked on previous episodes about the phasing out, if you like, in recent years of principal boys in some pantos. Historically, when Peter Pan was first staged, particularly in panto terms, the role was played by a girl or a woman. But I think times are changing, and whether that's played by a female, a male, or a female identifying or male identifying actor, it doesn't really matter, does it?
That's up to individual productions and producers about what they're looking for. I mean, Lulu has played Peter Pan quite famously. There are some principal boys that I think kids would relate to more if they were masculine. I think Aladdin is one. I think Peter Pan is one too, because there's something properly boyish about him. So I like to see Peter Pan played by a male actor. There are others that maybe, I don't know, like a Prince Charming. There's a certain pantomime style swagger about that character that could be played, because they're in the way the romance goes, it's more high level romance. It's kind of slightly androgynous, whereas I think the Peter Pan and Aladdin characters are like, why I'm doing the actions here you can't even see because it's a podcast. They're like wiry little kids that are just like full of life and full of energy and cheeky and all that, which is not to say that women can't be that. Of course they can. But those characters are male, and I like to see them played by boys.
And I think in the 21st century, Steve, times are changing, aren't they? And those male and female traditional roles are now changing. Whether you're male or female, male identifying, female identifying, there are now male and female dames, for instance, male and female principal boys. And in terms of diversity and inclusive casting, so far I think pantomime has done a reasonable job, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has done. I think we've gone full circle, and I think we are starting to see casting of any gender orientation, representation in any part, probably more than we have done for a long time. I think, as Stephen said, it's down to individual style and expectation of both venue management, the producer, and the audience. And I think, as far as we are concerned, it's the right person for the right part. And I have a very open expectation in auditions when I attend and in our casting calls that we put out, that we don't have any predetermined ideas as to what those characters will be. Because I think if a non-binary or a male or a female or a transgender performer walk into the room and give you an absolutely beautiful representation of a character that you're looking for, then that to me is a far more exciting opportunity for casting than going in with a predetermined, well, this is what I want it to be. And we've seen some great performers, as I'm sure all producers have, which have been against type. And sometimes that's really exciting. Panto has always been at the front of being able to do that. The stories and the way we present them are absolutely geared for any representation that we as producers and audiences would like to see.
And Stephen, you talked about changing the Native Americans. This is a theme across a number of pantomimes in, changing social values and so on. And I think the way that you changed, what were Native Americans to become rainbow warriors was incredibly inspired. And we need to see more of that, don't we?
I think so. I mean, it's not just, you're using the term Native Americans. They're called Indians in the book. And that I think is one of the issues. But if you looked at a film of a panto in the 60s when I was growing up, you would probably be aghast at some of the things that were being said and done. And things just change over time, sometimes gradually, sometimes quickly. And I think in terms of that, we're in the middle of a period where things need to change a bit more quickly because society has moved on at pace in the last 4 or 5 years about these sorts of things. So it's absolutely in the zeitgeist. So we need to be mindful of what greater society is saying. I'm doing Sleeping Beauty this year, and for me, there's an issue with the consent of the kiss. Now, yes, you can go, oh, it's just a fairy story. Of course, he kisses the princess and all that. But now, in these days where we need to be aware of consent issues and all that sort of stuff, we have modified the script to bring it in. And I think I've done it in what I hope is going to be a kind of funny but acceptable way of doing it, that I think we just need to be aware that that's not how society is anymore. So we need to modify slightly what we do.
And this is exactly why pantomime has lived on for so many years across centuries, and the genre and Peter Pan will live for many, many years to come. Steve and Stephen, thank you so much for talking to us.
Delighted, pleasure.
And that's it for another episode, I'm afraid. Don't forget to keep your questions coming in, and make sure you join me, Martin Ballard, next time for episode 66, when I'll be catching up with the Imagine Joint CEO and Business and Marketing Director, Sarah Boden, with an update on what's happening across the company, with rehearsals for this season already in full swing. And don't forget, get your tickets now. No matter where you live in the UK, there's a pantomime near you. See you next time on Just Imagine.
Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Just Imagine, the podcast series from Imagine Theatre. And you can find out more by going to www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.